Emily Lawson, a trusted army nurse known for her dedication, vanished one quiet evening after leaving the base hospital. Reeves, a man whose charm masked a predatory mind, had been watching her for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Detective Sarah Collins uncovered unsettling links between Emily's disappearance and other missing military women. Realizing this was no isolated case, Colonel James Parker fought to protect his unit's reputation as fear spread through the ranks, exposing cracks within their own system. And when the truth about Daniel Reeves finally emerged, it revealed a monster who had turned his obsession with military women into a calculated hunt that shocked the entire nation. Sergeant Emily Lawson was the kind of army nurse everyone admired. She had spent years serving her country with dedication, tending 2 injured soldiers, and offering comfort to families during their darkest hours. Her colleagues described her as dependable, thoughtful, and remarkably resilient. Someone who carried herself with quiet confidence, even in the chaos of a military hospital. On the night of her disappearance, Emily had worked a long shift, attending 2 wounded soldiers and ensuring that every patient under her care felt safe and cared for. When she left the hospital, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the streets near the base. Her routine that evening seemed ordinary, but it would mark the last time anyone would see her alive. Emily's car was found the next morning, parked in a small, seldom-used lot near a nearby park. The vehicle was unlocked, and the keys were still inside. Her purse and phone were nowhere to be found. Investigators were baffled by the scene. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no indication of a robbery. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The immediate thought for some was that she might have run off or decided to disappear voluntarily, but those who knew her well dismissed the idea. Emily was committed to her work and had always been deeply connected to her family. There was no reason for her to abandon everything she had built. The first hours of the search were critical, but the absence of witnesses complicated the investigation. Security cameras along the streets near the hospital had blind spots, and the few recordings that did exist showed nothing unusual. Her colleagues recounted seeing her leave the building at her usual time, carrying a small bag and wearing a light jacket against the cool evening air. Beyond that, her movements became a mystery. Her disappearance left a void not only in her family's lives, but in the community of soldiers who had relied on her calm presence. Anxiety grew with each passing hour, and the sense of unease quickly turned to fear. Authorities began canvassing the area, speaking to nearby residents, joggers, and drivers. But no one had seen or heard anything suspicious. A missing person report was filed, and the military and local law enforcement joined forces to comb through the surrounding neighborhoods. They conducted searches in parks, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings, hoping to uncover any clue that could lead to her. Still, Emily seemed to have vanished without leaving a trace. Each passing day added weight to the fear that something far more sinister had occurred than a simple disappearance. Her family described her as careful and cautious, someone who never wandered into dangerous situations. The thought that she could have been targeted by someone with ill intent became increasingly plausible. Investigators began to wonder whether her disappearance was random or if someone had been watching her, planning the moment to strike with precision. The lack of evidence was frustrating and alarming, leaving the possibility of foul play looming over every theory. Every lead, no matter how small, was scrutinized, but the absence of clues made the case almost impossible to solve. News of Emily's disappearance quickly spread through the military community. Fellow nurses and soldiers shared their concern, posting messages online and offering support to her family. The fear that a trusted member of their ranks could be in danger unsettled many, and questions about safety on and off the base grew louder. As the investigation continued, the initial hope that she might return on her own began to fade. The certainty that something terrible had happened slowly took its place, and the haunting thought of Emily trapped somewhere, unable to call for help, cast a shadow over everyone who knew her. By the end of the first week, the search had expanded beyond the immediate area, involving hundreds of volunteers and law enforcement personnel. Drones scanned remote areas, tip lines flooded with calls, and every lead was chased. Yet Emily remained missing. Her disappearance was no longer just a mystery, it had become a nightmare, one that hinted at forces working in the shadows, watching, waiting, and possibly preying on those who served. The question that lingered in every mind was the same. Had Emily Lawson become a victim of something far darker than anyone could have imagined? As the search for Emily Lawson stretched into weeks, investigators began noticing troubling patterns that hinted at a far more sinister reality. At first, her disappearance seemed like an isolated incident, an inexplicable vanishing that defied logic. But as they reviewed old cases and missing person reports, a chilling thread began to emerge. Other military women had gone missing over the past few years, many under circumstances that mirrored Emily's. Each woman had been young, disciplined, and respected in her field. None had enemies that anyone could identify, and in every case, their sudden absence left friends and family desperate for answers. The realization that Emily might not be alone in her fate sent shockwaves through the investigative team. Detectives pored over every detail of previous cases, searching for commonalities that could point to a single perpetrator. They discovered that each woman had been highly visible in her military unit or community, often commuting alone or taking the same routes after work. Small details, once dismissed as coincidences, now began to paint a grim picture of calculated predation. The notion that someone was specifically targeting women in the military was no longer speculation, it was a frightening possibility that could not be ignored. Investigators began examining the profiles of missing military women across several states. Patterns emerged in their routines, the timing of their disappearances, and even the locations where personal items were left behind. In Emily's case, the abandoned car and missing belongings matched a template that appeared in earlier cases. This suggested that whoever was responsible was not impulsive. They were organized, meticulous, and patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The thought that a predator could be operating with such precision within or near the military community was deeply unsettling. As word of the emerging pattern spread, the military itself became involved in ways that had not been anticipated. Officers reviewed security footage, access logs, and duty rosters to determine whether anyone had been monitoring Emily or the other missing women. The investigation expanded to include background checks on personnel who might have been in proximity to the victims. Every soldier, contractor, and civilian connected to the cases was scrutinized. The realization that a potential serial offender could be hiding in plain sight within the ranks heightened the sense of urgency and fear. Families of missing women were contacted and interviewed, and they recounted eerily similar experiences of feeling watched or receiving strange attention before their loved ones vanished. These accounts, previously considered anecdotal or coincidental, now contributed to a profile of someone obsessed with control and intimidation. Authorities began constructing a timeline of events, linking the disappearances to geographic patterns and moments when military personnel were most vulnerable during commutes, late shifts, or routine errands. The threads, once scattered and disjointed, started to form a disturbing tapestry of premeditated targeting. The media soon picked up on the theory, amplifying public concern. Stories of missing military women ignited debate about safety, the vulnerability of service members, and whether internal systems were failing to protect those who served. Fellow soldiers grew increasingly wary, sharing tips and precautions among themselves, while families clung to hope but braced for the possibility of tragedy. The fear that Emily had become part of a deliberate and calculated scheme cast a long shadow over everyone connected to her life and work. Investigators faced immense pressure to connect the dots quickly. The idea of a serial predator targeting women in uniform was horrifying, and each new piece of evidence was weighed with extreme care. Small discoveries, a discarded item, a familiar route, a witness who almost saw something, were all scrutinized for meaning. The sense of urgency was compounded by the terrifying reality that, if Emily had been targeted, she might not be the last. The investigation was no longer just about finding one missing nurse. It was about preventing further attacks and uncovering a predator who had remained hidden in plain sight for far too long. The community of military women began to live with a new awareness. Every walk home, every trip to the store, every seemingly safe routine became a source of caution. The very institutions meant to protect them could not shield them from someone who was patient, calculating, and determined. The haunting possibility that Emily Lawson had fallen into the hands of a serial offender loomed over every thought, every decision, and every action. What had once been a single disappearance now revealed the beginnings of a terrifying pattern, one that investigators were desperate to stop before it claimed another life. As investigators continued to unravel the disturbing patterns surrounding Emily Lawson's disappearance, a new lead emerged from an unexpected source. Months into the case, digital detectives scoured online activity connected to missing military women and stumbled upon a series of encrypted forums hidden deep in the web. These were not typical social media spaces but private, invitation-only corners where conversations about military personnel were conducted in coded language. The discussions were unsettling. Users shared information about women's routines, unit assignments, and personal habits with an obsessive level of detail. Something about the meticulous documentation made authorities' stomachs churn. Whoever was behind this wasn't just opportunistic. They were calculating, patient, and methodical. The team began piecing together digital footprints. It appeared the perpetrator had spent months, possibly years, tracking women in the military. Posts contained details that could only have been obtained through careful surveillance, such as late-night commutes, training schedules, and even moments when individuals would be alone. Investigators realized that the disappearances were not random acts of violence, but carefully planned events orchestrated with chilling precision. Each missing woman was being targeted for her role, her visibility, and her independence. The dark reality was that the predator had a specific type in mind, someone who embodied the strength and discipline of military life. As the investigation delved deeper, authorities discovered evidence of online exchanges that revealed an obsession with control and manipulation. Some posts discussed hypothetical scenarios, the perfect abduction, and ways to remain undetected while stalking targets. The level of detail suggested a deep familiarity with military routines and access to private information. Investigators began considering the horrifying possibility that the perpetrator might have connections to the military itself, someone who could move unnoticed and blend seamlessly into the environment. The mere thought sent a ripple of fear through the ranks. Law enforcement also analyzed metadata and IP addresses, tracing activity back to specific geographic locations near military bases. While much of the information was intentionally obscured using encryption and proxy servers, certain patterns became evident. The suspect was methodical, avoiding detection while leaving a digital breadcrumb trail that hinted at their obsession. Each new discovery painted a darker picture of a predator who thrived on control and had likely been planning attacks for years. The sophistication of the online network made it clear that Emily was not just a victim of chance, but a target chosen with care and forethought. The digital evidence added a chilling dimension to the investigation. Whereas previous leads had relied on physical clues, cars, belongings, and surveillance, footage this new avenue revealed a psychological depth to the crimes. Investigators now understood that the perpetrator derived satisfaction not only from the act of taking a victim, but from the meticulous planning and stalking that preceded it. Emily's daily life, once routine and mundane, had been scrutinized, logged, and studied. Every decision, from the route she took home to the time she left work, had been anticipated by someone with a dangerous level of insight. This revelation reshaped the investigation entirely. The authorities were no longer chasing a lone event, they were tracking an ongoing threat, someone who could strike again at any moment. Digital forensic teams worked tirelessly, reconstructing the online network and cataloging every post, every exchange, and every hint of planning. The deeper they dug, the more horrifying the picture became. A predator with an obsessive fixation, capable of remaining hidden while carefully monitoring multiple targets. The implications rippled beyond the investigation itself. Military personnel were advised to exercise extreme caution, to vary routines, and to report any unusual activity immediately. The community realized that Emily Lawson's disappearance was not just a personal tragedy, it was part of a larger, more sinister reality. The predator was patient, intelligent, and relentless, and while investigators worked around the clock to uncover the person behind the dark web activity, the haunting truth settled over everyone involved. Emily Lawson had become part of a calculated, methodical plan that no one had seen coming, and the danger was far from over. After months of painstaking investigation, a breakthrough finally arrived, though it came with a chilling realization. Surveillance footage from a small gas station located a few miles from Emily Lawson's last known location revealed something that had previously gone unnoticed. Emily was seen getting into a car with a man whose face had never been identified in prior investigations. The vehicle was ordinary, unremarkable, and seemingly innocuous. Yet every detail of the footage sent a shiver down the investigators' spines. For the first time, there was tangible proof that Emily had been in the presence of someone who might have orchestrated her disappearance. The man's calm demeanor, combined with the timing and location, suggested he had been waiting, watching, and had executed his plan with precision. Forensic teams examined the vehicle and surrounding areas, discovering traces of Emily's DNA in multiple locations. These findings confirmed that she had been inside the car and possibly held there for some time. Investigators began to piece together a timeline, estimating when and where she had been taken, and noting how carefully the suspect had avoided detection. The forensic evidence painted a disturbing picture of a predator who had not acted on impulse, but had planned his actions meticulously. It became clear that Emily was not a random victim. She had been targeted, and the man responsible had studied her life in great detail. Authorities expanded their search for the suspect, cross-referencing criminal databases, military records, and background checks. They discovered a man with a history of violence against women, someone whose previous offenses had escalated over time. His past suggested obsessive tendencies and an increasing focus on women in positions of independence and strength. The pattern of his previous crimes bore frightening similarities to Emily's disappearance, raising the possibility that he had been studying military women for years before taking action. Every new piece of evidence added weight to a terrifying theory. Emily Lawson's abduction was part of a deliberate and calculated pattern. Investigators also discovered personal items that had been discarded or hidden along likely travel routes, further connecting the suspect to Emily. These objects, once mundane, a glove, a piece of jewelry, a scarf, became critical clues. Each item represented a breadcrumb in the suspect's meticulous plan, providing a timeline and suggesting movement between locations. The realization that the perpetrator had not only planned the abduction but also carefully managed the aftermath left investigators both relieved to have evidence and horrified by the extent of the control he exerted over his victims. The evidence prompted a re-evaluation of the suspect's methods. He had avoided leaving fingerprints, altered his appearance when necessary, and carefully monitored his target's movements. His ability to remain unseen despite repeated acts of violence suggested a level of cunning and intelligence that made him particularly dangerous. Authorities concluded that he had likely learned from past mistakes, becoming increasingly adept at eluding law enforcement while maintaining his obsessive surveillance of potential victims. This understanding intensified the urgency to apprehend him before he could strike again. The investigation culminated in a coordinated effort between military police, federal agents, and local law enforcement. Teams analyzed every piece of digital and physical evidence, reconstructing the suspect's movements and predicting potential future actions. The tension was palpable, as everyone involved knew that one misstep could allow him to escape again. The realization that Emily Lawson's life, and potentially others, depended on their precision and timing added a weight of responsibility that pressed on the investigators day and night. Finally, the investigation revealed the full scale of the suspect's obsession. He had tracked multiple military women over months, sometimes years, keeping detailed notes and creating a system to ensure he could act without being caught. Emily Lawson had become a victim of an individual whose fixation on control and domination had escalated to abduction. While authorities now had the first solid clues pointing to a tangible suspect, the case remained urgent and precarious. Emily's disappearance had uncovered a predator operating in the shadows, and every step closer to him revealed the chilling sophistication of his crimes. The investigation into Emily Lawson's disappearance reached its breaking point when the suspect, identified as Daniel Reeves, made a critical mistake. For months, Reeves had moved in silence, his digital trail buried beneath layers of encryption and his real-world movements disguised by constant relocation. But one careless act exposed him. Investigators monitoring dark web activity noticed a familiar username reappear after weeks of inactivity. The account posted a cryptic message referencing a new opportunity near the base. The location mentioned matched one of the military installations already under surveillance. The team immediately realized that Reeves was planning to strike again, and this time they were determined to stop him. Authorities quickly devised a sting operation. Undercover agents created a profile designed to lure Reeves into communication. The online persona was built to resemble his typical targets on active duty, nurse stationed at a nearby military facility. Within days, Reeves took the bait, initiating contact through a private message filled with his usual subtle probing questions. His tone was calm, confident, and unsettlingly familiar to investigators who had studied his previous behavior. As the digital correspondence continued, agents traced his location through hidden metadata he failed to conceal completely. Every word he typed brought them closer to his physical whereabouts. Meanwhile, ground teams began setting up surveillance near an old warehouse complex on the outskirts of a small town. The location matched coordinates linked to Reeves' past movements, and it appeared to Bennett exactly the kind of secluded environment he preferred. Hidden cameras and motion sensors were installed, and officers prepared for the confrontation that had been months in the making. Late one evening, a car matching Reeves' description appeared at the site. He exited the vehicle carrying a large duffel bag and checked the surroundings before entering the building. What followed was a tense few minutes that felt like hours. As the team waited for confirmation of his identity, when he re-emerged, the signal was given, and law enforcement moved in. Reeves tried to flee, but was quickly overpowered and taken into custody. Inside the warehouse, investigators made a grim discovery. The space was filled with evidence linking him to multiple disappearances. Boxes contained personal belongings of missing women uniforms, identification cards, photographs, and letters. Each item was catalogued and labeled with dates, revealing a pattern that stretched back years. Among the evidence was Emily Lawson's dog tag, resting inside a glass jar as though it had been preserved as a trophy. The room was eerily organized, with maps pinned to the walls and lists of names that suggested he had been planning future abductions. It was a chilling testament to the depth of his obsession and the meticulous care he had taken to hide his crimes. As Reeves was interrogated, his demeanor remained disturbingly calm. He spoke little and offered no explanation for his actions, though the evidence against him was overwhelming. Forensic tests confirmed the DNA traces found in his car, on his clothing, and inside the warehouse matched Emily's. Eventually, partial remains were discovered in a remote wooded area nearby, confirming what investigators had long feared. The discovery ended months of uncertainty, giving Emily's family a measure of closure but leaving behind a wave of grief that would never fully fade. The arrest sent shockwaves through the military community. Questions arose about how Reeves had been able to operate undetected for so long and whether internal systems had failed to notice the danger. Investigations into security protocols followed, leading to new measures designed to protect personnel, especially women serving in isolated or vulnerable positions. The case became a turning point, forcing the institution to confront an uncomfortable truth. The enemy was not always outside the ranks. In the aftermath, Emily Lawson's story became a symbol of resilience and the pursuit of justice. Her family established a foundation in her name, advocating for better safety measures for women in the armed forces. Though nothing could undo the tragedy, Her legacy became a reminder of the importance of vigilance and the cost of ignoring early warning signs. Daniel Reeves was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His calculated reign of terror finally brought to an end. Yet, even behind bars, the memory of what he had done lingered like a shadow, a haunting echo of how darkness can hide in plain sight.